Welcome back, everyone. My name is Jean-Pascal Chauvet. I am a strategy consultant at Ab Initio Software. I'm also a track producer for the MIT CDOIQ 2022 Track 6. Track 6 focusing on the CDOIQ toolkit. Now, a bit of housekeeping. These sessions are recorded. They will be available on the MIT website in a couple of months. There is a Q&A tab on the Whova platform, so feel free to send some questions. This session also has polls, so on the Whova platform, whether you are using the desktop or the iPhone app, there is a poll tab where you'll be able to answer the polls. Now, the topic of this next session is finding the needle in the data haystack. And we have Michael Davis, who is founder of Egghead AI. A warm welcome to you, Michael, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Paul, for that great introduction. I hope you guys enjoyed the other sessions. Like Jean-Paul said, I am the founder of Egghead AI, and what we are a startup that specializes in automating data governance tasks. That includes setting up ontologies, setting up data structures, and we also have a platform where we can help you find data in silos where it wasn't before. So I hope I would like to make this interactive. This is actually one of my first virtual type conferences. I'm usually there in person. And what I hope for you to get out of this is really an understanding of the process from end to end, because I know a lot of times as we go through journeys, we go to different presentations and there's bits and pieces that you pick up, but it's very difficult to see the whole process and end to end. And I have experience in working on this, so I'd like to share that with you. The first thing I'd like to do is really get a sense of the audience. So Jean-Paul, if you don't mind putting up the first poll that we have.
So I have fired the first poll. So everyone, if you go on the Whova platform in the poll tab, you'll be able to see this poll and put your thoughts on this important question. And it takes a minute or two for the result to come by. So Michael, continue, and then in a minute or so, I think we'll have some result, and I can read them to everyone.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna go very deep and wide, so I'm gonna go off camera for a little bit, but you guys would hear me clearly. Okay, stay tuned. All right, like I said before, today we want to talk about finding that needle in a haystack, and that's really a colloquial way to talk about information, right? It's very difficult to find information, and I found a really good analogy for that was the needle in a haystack, because I could think about a haystack, I could think about something that's shiny object. In preparation for my talk, what I actually did, I did a bit of research, and I actually found out that the needle of a haystack statement dates back to ancient times, and it was much difficult to find, and much more difficult to find the needle back then, because the needle was made out of probably an animal bone or structure, which is the same color as the haystack. So I was like, wow, this is really a good analogy and a good way to sum up where we are. Now, another reason I wanted to give this talk, because I have spent time with multiple clients, and it looks like everyone is trying to figure out this problem. So, and this is a problem that's been, as I said, we dated back to ancient times. It's really a communication problem, if you will, all right? Even before we had natural language and we had writing, we had a lot of tribalism because of, we have a lot of tribalism because everyone was working within their own silos. And with tribal information, yeah, someone has to have the knowledge, but then how is that knowledge shared? And there's difficulty with this because if you don't have a common language, then you can't communicate effectively. And a lot of what we're trying to do is force some type of communication, right? The communication could be between human and human, the communication could be with machine, but largely that's what we're trying to solve. This is really a communication problem. And we have a lot of information, as you know, over the years, and we're collecting a lot. And I'm sure you guys are here, you know the stats that, that in the last few years, an enormous amount of data has been collected compared to previous years. So we have a lot of information and we have a lot of things to manage. Now, why is that important? That's important because now you have a lot of things going on within the regulatory environment where companies have to be more agile, right? You have the right to have erasure, right to have your information released, and you know the penalty for those, right? So GDPR, the penalties, it could be up to 4% of your annual revenue. And when I first started looking at GDPR and regulations, there were a handful. GDPR didn't even exist as yet. But now you have many countries that are going in and they're trying to also set up their own regulation to protect the information for their customers. Now, a lot of, no matter how, it always surprises me that no matter how far that we go with technology, we're still ways behind. Case in point, I'm actually in a wedding, a destination wedding this summer. And we had to get our outfits, right? We had to get our suits. And of course, the guys were first. We're not. We were not. Right. So we were a little behind on that. So we got measured, and the gentleman gave me a ticket number. And he told me, but I need to have this ticket number. I need to save it. This is the only way you're going to get your suit. Okay, I said, fine. He said, I'll be on vacation, but my staff will be here. And this is again, keep this ticket. So then I go home, and then I received a call because all the guys are prepared. There was one guy missing, and he needed to get the information of the suit. So he needed to know the color that we're using, and he needed to know the SKU and all that type of information. So I called the store and I gave my ticket number. The gentleman on the phone says, I can't find your suit. I said, but I gave you my ticket number. He could not find the suit with that ticket number. And this is a multi-state chain that does this regularly. So I told him I had a payment ID I got because, they were good on that technology part where as soon as I made a deposit, I immediately received a receipt. So he said, well, send that to me and then I can look in my records to see if I could find it. I was astonished. I said, but I have the ticket number. And as a data guy, it kind of irked me a little bit. So I kept pressing that point. And 5 hours later, another manager calls me and she asked me what store did I got the suit from. So as you can see, the information that they have, they collect a lot of information, but they're not managing it properly. And this is a lot that happens in our silos, right? And that's why I said it's largely a communication problem. And if we can fix that, it would be really beneficial and really easier for people to get insights. There's some, of course, you can't fix. Like, for instance, my wife, who's kind of listening now. I was doing a little tidying up around the house, and her handbag was laying on a chair. So I asked her, where would she like me to put it? She said to put it in the closet. So I put it in the closet. So a few hours later, she comes back and asks me, where did you put my handbag? I said, I put it in the closet. She said, but I looked there and I didn't see it. I said, but I put it in the closet. She said, did you put it in the bag closet or the closet? So we had different meaning, right? So I'm thinking I'm putting it in the closet, but I didn't know, I wasn't aware there was another repository. So these are the issues that we run in when we don't have common language, common definitions for things. And it's the same things that percolate throughout the organization.
Hey,
So,
Michael, Michael, it's interesting because like what you just talked about is spot on in terms of the poll results. So three broad categories in those poll results. Number one is a lack of metadata, and which talks to what you just brought up. Second is the data access and finding data, the challenges in finding data. And then the third category is around data quality and data accuracy.
oh, awesome. Yeah, so that's I should go on camera so you can see me nodding my head in approval. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, so we're gonna have a good talk, and like I said
I
too,
think
if
so, yeah.
questions come in, just feel free to interject, and so I shall continue. Okay, so what one thing that I thought was interesting is that I can use FAIR principle to guide the data strategy in setting up a system that can manage data effectively. And for people who are not familiar with FAIR, it's really an acronym that was created around, I believe, 2014. And the reason that it was created is it's an acronym that stands for a methodology. And the reason that it was created is because scientists from all over the world, different silos, like in business, they're trying to get information on how to work together. Everyone has a different part that they're working on. Everyone has, country restrictions, but yet they still need to collaborate, right? How do you do that effectively? So they actually sat down and came up with this. So that's why I like to, and I'm sure you'll hear this throughout your sessions here too, because it's really a powerful paradigm, and it's one that I have really adapted in our practice that has been very helpful. So the FAIR is an acronym that means that information should be findable, accessible, interruptible, and repeatable. Now, the reason that I find that we can use the FAIR principle to drive the strategy, because each of those components in the FAIR principle help us to set up the environment. For instance, for information to be findable, you have to have the information at least tag, and that where it comes in with metadata. So you have to have good metadata. You have to also have a common vocabulary, right? Because if I'm looking for something, I need to understand where that thing is, but then I have to have enough information to allow me to find that thing. And part of that also is the standardization. Because if you're searching for something, you want to make sure that you're searching the right format, and what you get is actually what you're looking for. You want to make sure also that your policies and your procedures are aligned with definable concept, so that you can make sure that you're designing your systems. And one thing really critical about the FAIR, that's interesting about the FAIR principle, it's not just data itself. It really talks a lot too about metadata, and actually even the plumbing, like how are you getting your data, whether you're doing it on-prem or cloud, or whatever. And also to have it findable, because findable in the sense, I kind of extended it. So I'm not talking about if I could find information, it's fine. I'm talking about finding high quality information. So we have to make sure that we have good data quality around the information to make sure that it's findable. We also have to have provisions, especially now, for privacy and sensitive data. So in our case, if we, going back to that example when we were trying to get the suit, if the information had been not only tagged properly, but if they had a standard process for recording that information, then we wouldn't have to take 5 or 6 hours in order to resolve an issue. It'd be much easier. Moving on, the A for in the FAIR principle is accessible, and we can really gloss over that. That really deals with, again, what I said. If you, how you doing with the cloud? Is it native? Are you doing stuff in prem? To be honest with you, in this whole process, that's probably one of the lesser components you have to worry about. One thing that's very critical is that you just have to make sure that you build things right, and you have the right strategy, and you have the right governance strategy. Okay, moving on. The I in the FAIR principle is for interoperable. And in order for something to be interoperable, you have to at least know what it is, right? So you have to have some kind of inventory, some kind of listing. Also, there should be some connectivity or communications between two systems. How do they communicate? We need to make sure. It also have a common language, right? That makes it easy to rationalize and understand things. Just this morning, I actually read a report, I believe it was in the New York Times, and it was about the ongoing war in Ukraine. And the article stated that Ukraine was having a hard time to get the weapons that they got from other countries to the front lines. So I was curious, I dug more into the article. And when I looked into the article, the reasons that they're having the problem is that they have a governance problem. And that's what it was, because each of the equipment that they have from different countries, they use different ammunitions. There are different sets of training. There's no consolidation there. So it's very difficult for them to operate, and is also causing them a headache. I read further, and actually there's something, and someone on the call might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe they're stagnacs. And I guess those are actually military orders in a way to standardize munitions for NATO. I didn't even know that existed. So those are the things and the type of things that you need to have to be interoperable, right? You need to have standards that each component and each country would follow. Because if it was the same, if it was at least the same standard, then they wouldn't have this problem. It would be easier for them to get through things. The next and the last is repeatable, right? You want to be able to reuse all the information you have. And in order to reuse something, right, you have to have the common language, right? You have to have the connectivity, and you have to have the right architecture. So this is some of the things that I just covered. You have to have, findable. These are the things that are related. And all of these things, if you look closely to them, it's related to the way that you manage your information, right? For interoperable, make sure that you have a good integration. It looks like you know what's very interesting? I made the same typo on 2 presentations. I did a similar presentation for just the FAIR principle. Actually, probably was MIT, probably 2016, and I misspell it, so I'm more fire, but it's FAIR, so I have to correct that typo as well. The next thing is, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So what does that mean? That means is have an idea of what you're trying to do. Don't try to get into building out data strategies just because some other company is doing it. What are you trying to do, and what's good for your organization? It's not necessarily one size fit all, right? So the big thing, you should be metadata driven, right? Everything that you want should be driven by the metadata because it's easy to abstract things. And when you abstract them, it's easy for you to connect the dots and you could understand how they pertain to one another and how they relate. We're also going to cover ontology and then connecting the dots in this session. All right, so getting started. I'm sorry, but you still it's still governance in getting started, right? So that has to deal with how are you collecting the information, how are you treating the information that you have. Sorry, I was on the right thing. Yeah, that deals with what kind of information that you have. It deals with the stewardship, right? Who's taking responsibility for this? Like, who's going to tell us what's going wrong and what's going right and what things that we need to share? Also, data quality, right? What do we have to enrich? What fields, what attributes, what things do we have to enrich? And of course, you cannot go anywhere without data protection. As you know, right now it's a very important topic to a lot of different countries and also to individuals. People are really taking ownership of their data and they want to make sure that you're using it properly. So what you need in your governance organization is the same setups that you generally need, right? You need your steering committees, and you need your data stewards, and you need to have your standards, your procedures, like how you're going to tackle data quality. You need to identify your different producers, consumers. Yeah, all of these various things that you need to do. Also, a very good, a lot of people think that it needs to be extensive to be a data governance, data quality program, but really you could start a program with one or two or a few people, right? You don't need a whole suite of people in order to start a data governance program. It could be, as long as you have those aspects and someone is playing that role. So you can have one who's playing a role, let's say of a data engineer that helps with managing the metadata. You have someone that's playing the role of a steward. But ultimately, I believe that everyone in a company really is a data steward. You guys also, a lot of folks are using, especially with the new technologies, a lot of people are pairing that with non-invasive type of non-invasive data governance. And shout out to Bob. Bob Snyder has a good a book about that to help people get up to speed quickly on that initiative. So yeah, be the master of your domain, right? So that's the first step in your process, right? You have to understand your business. And I work with a couple of clients that's been in business for maybe 50 or plus years, and they all want to go back to the drawing table. And the reason being is years ago, companies, first of all, in order for you to come out with innovation, you have to be, a stalwart, right? One of these large organizations. And, so it's very difficult for anyone else to come out with another product. You probably wouldn't see an innovation. Probably the innovation happen every 10 years or so. I'm just making that up. But now, the differentiator with when someone is successful or not is if they can actually make decisions and make them quickly. And in order for you to make decisions quickly, you have to identify your information. You have to be the master of your domain. You have to find out what's your producers, what are your consumers, and how do you start this process, right? It starts with, sponsorship. You have to make sure you get sponsorship. And to be honest, a lot of times MDMs, it could be difficult in order for you to get the sponsorships that you need. um, because sometimes, sometimes it's a hard sell, to be honest. But if you can show the value, which is there's tremendous value, and hopefully that discussion is getting easier and easier. But when I said understand your process, you need to focus on the respect. You need to know what you have to know what to focus on. So do an inventory of your processes in the area. You have working groups trying to come up with a process. Identify your domains, right? Domains are things like customer, right? But these are things that are master, right? So these are a low cardinality information. And then once you have that, you can identify your producers, identify your consumers, right? What are the expectations, right? How would we build this to satisfy? And now you can't boil the ocean in a sense, but you can. There's some good practices that you can do to pick out, which use case you could go first. I would recommend one, and I guess a good rule of thumb too. It takes thumb. Whether it's a POC or not, it takes about 6 months in order to build out at least your MDM program. That's between your modeling and then understanding what you have, and also have the choose a use case, and also the use cases you should have are the use cases that are really that right now. Right, it's kind of, I know a lot of times people try to build for the future. That's good in a sense, but you need to balance that out with what you have now. Otherwise, you would spend a lot of time in your program, and then you wouldn't be able to complete it. Okay. So, John Paul, if you don't mind releasing the next poll.
Sure. So again, if you go to the Hoover platform and find the poll tab, I am firing the poll right now. We have a couple of questions, Michael,
Okay.
while we are waiting for the air. So okay. One is I think quite important. How do you define ontology? How do you explain it to those who are unfamiliar with the concept?
Right, and we're gonna get to that.
We are going to get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that one. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then there is another question: how do I enter into this segment without coding?
How do they enter into the segment?
Into this area of data. Like the way I read the question is how important knowing how to code to this area of data slash metadata.
Oh, actually, it's not at all. None of this relies on coding. The most technical you will get with this is there's a tool that's called Protege, and it's used for it's part of the OWL framework, so it's used to create ontologies, and it's free as well, and that's the most technical that you might get. But Excel works. I mean, PowerPoint works just as fine to create an ontology. Yeah, so you don't need specific coding to get an ontology, but you can build all of this with a Python script. You can build an ontology with a Python script, but yeah, you don't need to know that specifically. Most of the times we work with our clients, we're not talking coding. It's really a lot of upfront design work, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense, and I would agree. Like my experience is coding is nice to have. It opens slightly additional doors, I would say, but it's not necessary. So right. back to the poll, Michael. How mature is your data organization? We have just one answer, and it reads teenager.
Oh, okay.
So if others have views on this, please go to the tab, the poll tab on the Hoover platform, and then you can give your thought on this poll. But let's talk about ontology. I think like there are some questions on ontology. This is really important. So go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's talk about ontology. So ontology, what ontology is, and I think this would answer the person questions as well. If you it's kind of like an ontology here. So ontology deals with classes, relationships, and attributes. So the whole thing about ontology is that you get a representation, a visual representation of your data. So I'll give folks a second to absorb that, because I think once you see how an ontology looks, you can kind of factor that in your head of how it should be. But in a nutshell, what ontology is a vocabulary, right? It's really your vocabulary of your organization. Okay, so how do you get to an ontology? Well, that's why I started with the beginning, identifying your common vocabulary, your terms, quality checking, because all of that feeds into your ontology. And the ontology is nothing more than the representation of that thing with your organization. So customer is a subject domain. And as you can see, that's right there in our ontology. And this is a very simple ontology. And what this is saying is that customer, you consider that's a class. But not only that, the ontology has the classes, what's really powerful, it has the relationships. So what's not written in here, and I probably would update this slide, is you would have something like customer has location, and then that's an address. And then stemming down from address to city name, you can say address contains city name, and address contains street name. Now I'll pause there for a second, because the city name and street name, these are attributes. The has and the contains, those are the relationship. So Jean-Paul, I just wanted to make sure that person that answered the question, asked the question, if this clarifies what ontology is for them.
I think it does. Yeah, this is a very simple way to explain ontology, and I think makes the point. So it does. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Thanks.
So another thing with that's very interesting with ontology is that you can combine ontologies, and that's the power, right? You can combine them with other ontologies, and the reason is because everything is extracted at a level. Because so think about customer, right? Let's say what is a customer? Well, a customer is a person. So as you guys do some exploration into ontologies, what you would find is that there's tons of ontologies that are out there. Some are good and some are not good, right? But there's one that's also free, and it's called the Basic Formal Ontology. It's known as BFO, and it was created by, I believe his name is Barry. I can't remember his last name, but it's an easy way for any business to adopt the ontologies. So any business could go and use ontology in their business. It's all, but the way that you use it, it extends from that ontology. And how this ontology spans from other ontology, like the gene ontology and the OBO, you'll see like things like OBO Foundry ontologies. And all of those is just libraries or collection of vocabulary and concepts at a high level. So for instance, if you have one of your system that has a customer, and you're working with another organization that have customer, you would be able to bridge these two data sets together. And the way that you would do it, you would have a common identifier, you would have a common class. And that common class would be something like a person class. So that's why you may see that in a lot of data definitions or ontology. It actually extends from what they call a reference ontology. Okay, let me move on. I hope you guys are okay and no questions there. So now we want to, connect the dots. And one way to connect the dots is really, you have all your information now. You have your master data. Everything in your master data is fine. You have your ontology. So connecting the dots is actually what brings us to what they call a knowledge graph. And the knowledge graph helps you to traverse your data. And the reason it can do this is because all your data points are now connected. If you go back to the ontology, this is an ontology. What would make this a knowledge graph is to have the data attached to it. So that's what the knowledge graph is. It's the ontology plus data. And what ontology allows you to do is actually combine your data with your classes, your relationships, and your attributes. So for instance, on an ontology diagram, you can have customer and you can have that customer's name there. So again, you can have a visual representation of that information. And once you have this, you should be able to go into any system and compare them, because you know exactly what that connection is. And ontology it's actually the same type of system that Apple uses for Siri, right? It's called that logic. It abstracts everything so it can connect everywhere. Now there are tools that folks use as well once they have their ontology built out. There's some graphing tools that is used. But the idea is that you connect all aspects of your data, not only your documents, right? Because documents could be a class as well. You could connect any relationship that you connect together, and then you can make that searchable. Another way to get the ontology is really just looking at your information, right? You have like if you have a hard printout of a document on your website, let's say, or how your business functions, and or better yet, that I'll use an example in the insurance industry, since I work in that industry from time to time. Policyholder has a deductible. Within that phrase, you already have part of your ontology. And that's a good way to cheat your way to an ontology. You look at the documents and look at the process documents and see what it's doing. So you see policyholder is your class. And then you have the relationship, right? He has a relationship to deductible. So now deductible, you can see that as an attribute. Customer purchases a product. Within that, your ontology, you see customer purchases, that's the relationship, and with product. Now, product is also a class. So product could have its own hierarchical relationship as well. And it can also be abstracted so that it can be combined with other information. So within the product, as a description, as the example that I just shared, you connect it to the customer. So if you could follow that connection in your mind, you see all the information is connected. Just think. I know it's kind of hard to visualize, but that's very powerful, because that's what ontologies and combining MDM with good metadata practices give you. It gives you a way to have all your information and make it easy for you to find it. So now automation is easy for you to do because you can say, just get me person, right? If you're going to code your automation, and it would show all the tie-ins with automation once you have that. And ontologies can also help with your AI processes. So now you're not living like a robot. Like at times we think in like where clauses, right? So you want to find something, you're like, where can I find X, right? So we're still living in a world where it's pretty much about, where clauses at this point. But with ontology, I can say, where's my customer living on this street, right? And then get an answer using the current technologies that are out there that can leverage ontological models and knowledge graphs. So that is the power. It gives you the ability to answer more questions and get answers quicker. Because, and get the right answers too. And one point I should have made with the MDM is also one thing that's very important too is the entity resolution. In order to find out, what's that unique person, right? Who's that unique customer? And I have actually run into that recently. I just went down to actually T-Mobile yesterday. I was trying to change my service. Half of us have Sprint in our family, and so I was going to change, but they weren't able to change me. They had me in one system as something else, and they said they didn't merge yet with the company that they've been merged for, I thought, for about a year. So they weren't able to find me. So you see these problems pop up all over. And the knowledge graph really gives you a good way to solve it because all your information is connected. Your entity resolutions are connected. You don't have the same person as a customer in two different systems because they're not merged. And these are the difficulties that we're having. And I'm seeing, I don't know if you guys on the phone are on the line are seeing it, but I'm seeing it everywhere. A couple weeks ago, I went to get some Chinese food, and I stopped by our Chinese restaurant, and I gave her my phone number, and she said, Sharon? And I was like, no, I'm not Sharon. I don't look like a Sharon, but that's because their information is probably duplicate, or they don't have the right remedies in order to solve that. So this is connecting the dots, and that's all that I had for you. So just to recap and I'll do this on camera, just to recap. So what I hope I showed you is how you can at least step your foot into the ways of ontologies and knowledge graph, and I'm available for questions. I mean, I live this stuff. I can send you some resources on getting started with ontology, with BFO. I did a couple of things with some clients on it. It's a very powerful methodology. We could go into deep stuff with your business, and I can give you some ideas with that as well. So I guess with this, I'm leaving some time for, I guess we have to leave some time for questions.
Michael, we have a couple of questions
Okay.
coming on Hoover. So the first one is ontology, semantic, data dictionary, and many other concepts. How to approach these terms in an easy way? Michael, are you there? Michael, I think your connection froze. Michael, can you hear me? The joys of virtual sessions. So while we are waiting for Michael to reconnect, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them on Hoover. I can see a couple here. I have a couple myself, actually, for Michael.
Hello?
Yeah, Michael, are you back?
Hey, sorry about that. My computer decided it had enough and it was done, and and I just lost the connection. I'm back. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Okay, all right. So the question reads, ontology, semantic, data dictionary, and many other concepts. How to approach these terms in an easy way?
You said semantic, ontology, and what were the other ones?
Data dictionaries.
Okay, so semantics really would be tied to, I would say, the data dictionaries, because with your data dictionary, that's where you have, or your business glossary, right? So data dictionary, I know you have, it could be a technical aspect as well, right? So I like to say, to clarify, I said business glossary, because with that, you have your semantics, you have your definitions. So that's where you start. You have to start with having a common definition. So it's those good old governance practices where you have your working sessions with your data stewards to rationalize what terms mean, what does a customer mean, come up with those definitions, because you need that first in your ontology. Because if you looked at what I showed with the ontologies, that you wouldn't be able to connect it if you don't have standardized terms, because the ontology relies on this for the connections,
yeah,
and also for the meaning.
Excellent. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question myself. Oh, sorry.
It's gonna cost you. No, go ahead.
No, something that I find very interesting in what you said in your getting started. You had on your slide getting started.
Mm-hmm.
One of your points in there was to be metadata driven. How do you get started if you are a corporation, right? If you are a city group, if you are a Ford Motors, if you are a Delta Airlines, how do you get started to be metadata driven?
That's an excellent question, right? Because a lot of companies claim they are metadata driven, but when you get under the hood, they're really IT driven, right?
Exactly.
How do you get there? That's the first thing. You have to align with a business strategy, right? So because you should be talking about business, and a lot of times, even if a company, because I've worked for large organizations as well, and I did consulting for large organizations, and I notice a lot of the big ones, they have these things, words we use. So they have some preliminary definitions of some common terms so that everyone can talk to the customer the same way. But how do you get started? You start like everything else. You start small, and going back to get that critical data elements, you get your those elements that are critical to your business, and then you start to get the metadata, use metadata from there. And the reason that metadata is so powerful is because data elements are everywhere, right? They're so voluminous. So it's kind of hard for you to track each one component of your data element. So the easiest things to have in your glossary is a way to track those elements by using your metadata. And even further, there's even ways and strategies that people use to define metadata. They have this concept that's called a concept. For instance, you could tie all your addresses together based on address as a concept, not address as a term, but address as a concept. And within address as a concept, you have your business address, you have an email address, and you might have some other address that's tied together. So there's a whole methodology around that.
And have you seen organizations that have been successful in moving from sort of IT system-led evolution to data-led to metadata-led, and really did that transformation and really become metadata-driven?
That's a very good question, and it's difficult to say. Okay. I've seen companies, because it's an evolution. So some companies might get some part, they get it right. But what I've noticed too, the argument is easier, right? Now people understand the significance of governance. Yes. So I think that first step where people are more aligned to, okay, what's the business outcome? I think that's happening organically now. That's the conversation, is like, what do we need from the business, right? Yeah. And the business would tell you, we need to understand our terms. We need to be more focus on the business and not really on the IT type led initiatives. So that's what I've seen. But everyone has to start small, and but even I think I see something that's powerful that's happening, and I don't necessarily say that I buy into any architectural designs or anything, but that's why I think where the architectural designs are going, especially with data mesh, right? So folks talk about data mesh who are not familiar, is really just a different architecture to help you find information, right? So it's building in teams as data producers and data consumers, and then it has a platform in the middle that people could access it. So you get your data however you want and however you need it. But what's interesting with that, John Paul, is that that's governance, really, right? Data mesh is set up as governance, because you have to have your standards in order for the information to be interoperable, right? And you have to know a lot about, you have to prepare your information, and you have to make sure that you're mastering your information as well. Because now you have a relationship with the customer, and the information cannot be wrong. So you have to make sure that when you put information out there, that it's accurate. So that's mastery. Now you have to master your information. So all of that, ties in to governance. And then you also have the quality aspects too. Right? Absolutely. It should be of high quality.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I find this field of transformation, right? When we say, okay, you need to be data driven, you need to be metadata driven, you need to, well, the argument won't be in what is needed. The argument is going to be, how do you go about transforming yourself so that you become that? And there's different paths to take. And these paths fail more often than they succeed. And so I don't think we have found a recipe all the way to the sort of ultimate goals quite yet. And I think between the role of the CDO, the role of the business in defining the objective, the role of IT, like, this is still evolving. I feel this is still evolving. And so getting your thoughts on this is really, really interesting. I see that we have another question. Actually, I'm not sure it's a question. It reads, balanced knowledge of business and technology alleviates to find the needle in the haystack. I guess the question is, what do you think about that? That's the question I would say.
I think it's great. I mean, everything is a balance, the yin and yang of it all. I mean, I think it ties into what you said too. How do you get, and that's why I kind of broke down my presentation in that way, because that's the question. But you're right. Haven't quite solved it. Because actually, when I did my MBA, this was the topic of my MBA.
Oh, really?
Years ago,
okay.
Right? Yes. Companies were struggling with big data. That was the topic back then. But it's the same thing, though. It's different topics. So they're struggling, but it's a difficult but a simple problem at the same time. But the difficulty is really in the people part of the equation, because it's really not rocket science what we're doing. I'm sorry if I'm blown on the spot, right? It's not. It's really, we're taking common words, common terms, making them unique, and making them easily for people to access and easily for people to use. Right? We should be able to sit down and come up with a list, but we know that's difficult. Like, I remember I worked with a group one time, I wouldn't say which client, but it took me at least 2 years just to get them to understand that this is part of data stewardship.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where you get the challenge. It's not in the because we know what to do. There's so many tools, there's so many platforms. But I think to get started, I think people have to take a step back. And I know it's easier said than done in organizations when people have timelines and other things that they need to get into. But in order for you to get ahead, sometimes you have to take a step back. And the reason I say that too is because not a lot of times people build things or do things with the long term in mind.
Yeah.
And I learned something very interesting from a gentleman. He was 85 years old. I heard him on a podcast, and I was asking him, what's the trick for longevity? And he says, you know what? I always look at the long term.
Yeah.
You never go wrong with the long term. And he gave an example where his friend was selling a house, and he wanted to get a certain amount of money for the house. This was before, I think it was around the 90s, before the crash. Okay. And his friend was like, I'm not getting enough money for this house. I'm not selling it. Now, 10 years later, because the crash went through, that's when his friends finally got to sell his house.
Yeah.
And I don't think he made a profit or not, but he told his friend, so throughout that years, you missed in all the investment opportunities you would had you had been thinking in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing with governance.
Yeah. This is a great point, and this is a great point to end this session as well. So, Michael, I want to thank you for really interesting thoughts and a lot of food for thoughts as well. We are going to take a break for 30 minutes. The next session will be with my co-producer, Andy Palmer, at 2 o'clock. So please be sure to join back in 30 minutes. Thanks, everyone. And Michael, again, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for coming. Thanks.